The Origins of Totalitarianism, a book by Hanna Arendt, was written, I think, originally in the 1950s or so. And I think the version I read was revised in the 1960s. It spends a fair amount of time talking about the development of anti-Semitism and various conspiracy theories about anti-Semitism. And then it goes into the tactics used by Hitler and Stalin. And there's a few interesting themes that show up throughout. Some of the important notes that they both shared are the importance of a very big lie, of consistently following up with your actions based on that lie, and it's also important to disregard the consequences. You just need to be consistent in following through on the big lie. So a short quote here. In 1932, that meant unemployment for almost half the German people. The candidates of the movements had to reckon with those who wanted change at any price, even at the price of destruction of all legal institutions. So basically, a very strong desire for change at any cost. Another interesting side effect of this time period is that there was a lot of efforts by various states to shove out people that they didn't want in their state, and other states not wanting to take in those people, and so you end up with a lot of stateless people, and the result of that is various forms of concentration camps. The author notes that in tumultuous times like this, there is a rise in the effectiveness of crackpots and con artists pretending to be geniuses. And no matter how often the things they say turn out to be false or foolish, it ends up not mattering in time periods like this. It's also essential that these con artists present their ideas with repetition and unshakable conviction. Another important feature mentioned by the author is that these movements could not have happened without widespread support of the masses, that a very large percent of the population had to believe in the movement. Another interesting feature is the propaganda value of evil or evil deeds. The Nazis were convinced that evildoing in our time has a morbid force of attraction. And one of the things that the Russians used was proudly proclaiming the fact that they would not conform to ordinary moral standards. Another little quote, "Deeds of violence are followed with an admiring remark, 'It may be mean, but it is very clever.'" Would-be totalitarian rulers usually start their careers by boasting of their past crimes and carefully outlining their future ones. Something that seems really relevant to people today is the sense of isolation and loneliness, with everybody staring at their phones even when they're outside walking their dogs. The author noticed that this kind of totalitarianism couldn't be done, it wouldn't be possible without a widespread feeling of isolation and loneliness and people's desire to be part of something. An important strategy used by various dictators is be very vague about your promises. Make them sound impressive and wonderful, but don't give details. She also mentions the tendency for the elite to be attracted to this, and there seemed to be a kind of enjoyment in watching the mob destroy respectability. She mentions a quote from Goebbels that basically, if you couldn't be a genius, you could be very happy if you could serve a genius. A consistent theme in the book was the importance of lies, and especially really big lies. A very big, bold lie was much more effective, and it was important to consistently reinforce the lie by making sure that everything that you do is done based on the lie and not based on reality or any other concerns like economics or resources or really anything else. When lying becomes so widespread, eventually you get to the point where people believe everything and nothing, where the craziest things that are claimed can be believed, and the most normal truths can be disbelieved. Another interesting kind of self-fulfilling feature is to constantly tell everyone that the whole world is against us. And the weird thing is that when you spend enough time trying to convince everyone that the whole world is against us and you follow through on that, eventually the whole world will be against you. Another critical feature that turned out is actually a strategy is constant instability. So you promise stability, but you create constant and permanent instability. Instead of changing all of the rules, if you have a constitution that you don't like, the best thing to do is to actually leave it in place and just ignore it. Another important tactic is to constantly throw people under the bus and promote new people to replace them. It helps prevent those people from getting too much power, and it redirects attention when things aren't going well. It also serves to make sure that no one ever gets really competent at their job. They don't get much experience because they keep getting replaced. Another part of the tactic of big, bold lies is to treat the entire world as a potential resource to be looted. All of your neighbors are potential places that you can take resources from. A common outcome of following through on the big lies and staying true to them and being consistent is that you have to ignore any consequences. You don't worry about whether or not something makes sense or if it's turning out really badly. The important thing is to be consistent and follow through on the big lie. This creates an interesting situation where the outside world is very confused as to how to behave relative to this totalitarian regime, where reality seems warped for them, where the whole rest of the outside world seems to be much more in touch with reality. Below the great leader are various subordinates who are constantly being thrown under the bus, and they find it difficult to know what to do next because very often they will start carrying out orders and someone else will simultaneously be doing the opposite. They've been told to do something that contradicts their orders. And so frequently people find that they are sort of scrambling around in the dark. Another really important feature is to define enemies, and you also have to have a plan in place in case you actually get rid of your first group of enemies. You need to have a second group and so on, so that the people in the movement always have a focus for their frustrations. A repeated theme in the book is that lies should be big. You go big or you go home. In Hitler's book, he mentions the importance of the fact that a lie must be enormous if it's to be successful. Another interesting feature of totalitarian regimes is that everyone in society is pushed into one of two roles, and those roles can switch over time. You are either an executioner or a victim, and you might be an executioner today, but you might end up being the victim tomorrow. The author ends by focusing again on loneliness. I found that really interesting. Her claim is that this has developed more and more since the Industrial Revolution, and that we can't really have totalitarian regimes without the feeling of isolation and loneliness. And if anything, this has gotten much more intense since the 60s. So it seems to be the case that the key ingredient for totalitarian regimes is loneliness and the need to belong to something.